Okay. I'm speaking today with Dr. Toni Bark, who practices family medicine in Chicago. I learned about Dr. Bark after hearing her speak at Autism One in Chicago this past May. I was very eager to interview her about her talk at A1. Dr. Bark has maintained a private practice in homeopathy for more than 15 years, and she also teaches in a master's program in medical disaster planning at Boston University. In 2012, Dr. Bark became the second vice president of the American Institute of Homeopathy. And so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. And at A1, you described yourself as an outraged academic because of the full control, not just influence, the pharmaceutical industry has over our health care. And because of this massive power and wealth of the pharmaceutical industry has, how likely is it that government officials would even acknowledge that this is true, let alone do anything to stop it? And in that same regard, is there any real oversight when it comes to medicine in America?
Big question. So I have to say, I'm going to start backwards. Is there any real oversight? Theoretically, there's some oversight, and I suppose with enough deaths caused by one drug or one procedure, at some point there's oversight. But we know that it can take 100,000 deaths, right? I mean, we know what happened with Vioxx and Avandia. The biggest problem is that the agencies which are supposed to be looking at the industry, and and this isn't just in the pharmaceutical industry, this is in gas and oil, this is in banking, this is in the food chain, anything that controls our food, again, going back to the FDA. I'm sure it's in other industries, but anything that there's a regulatory body, there's going to be corruption at a very high level and in a very big way, because there's billions of dollars at stake in these industries that I just mentioned, all of them. But my concern and my focus, of course, is looking at the pharmaceutical industry, although, food relates quite closely. I've heard whistleblowers from the FDA speak, and it certainly sounds like the FDA is basically a rubber stamp machine for the pharmaceutical industry to approve new drugs that are going to make a lot of money. We know that it takes whistleblowers to come forth and say, look, the FDA has been approving. We know that from studies and post-surveillance, there's been many deaths. But one of the key issues is that there's no whistleblower protection for federal workers. I mean, yes, there was a law passed last December in 2012 that finally gave whistleblower protection to federal workers, with the caveat of federal workers that have to do with any of the health regulatory agencies. So while we're all excited that finally there's going to be some whistleblower protection for people in the federal government, it wasn't whistleblower protection for people at the FDA, CDC, NIH, HHS. They only got military whistleblower protection, which is very little, if any. And so we don't have whistleblower protection, so it's very tough for a government official, to come forward at the HHS and any of its bodies, including the FDA, and say that this kind of monkey business is going on. There's been so many deaths. And so that's a problem. That creates a big impediment. And that's there for a reason. Those whistleblower protections are not there for that very purpose, to make it more difficult for people at the regulatory agencies to come forward with news that there is some malfeasance going on. And, so is there a regulatory? I don't really know how much regulation there really is. I think there's more politics. We know in order to get a drug approved, and this is getting into the push to get vitamins and supplements into the FDA approval process, which means, you have a vitamin, you want 6 million minimum to get it approved. And this is basically making it so pharma owns the market share of everything. And so there's a lot of politics involved. Will government officials come forward to say that there's problems? and that we have a problem, that vaccines could be causing a problem, it's very tough for any kind of government official to do it. We've seen senators, we've seen congressmen come forward and say we have a problem, but we also know that they're not going to get funding from the pharma consortium if they create problems for pharma, right? So if you're from New Jersey, let's say, or Illinois, anywhere where there's a headquarters of Merck or Glaxo or Abbott or Baxter, any of these companies, and you're making a problem for them, you're not going to get funding in your campaign, and they'll make it really clear to you. So it's very hard for our legislators to come forward. It's even harder for people in the FDA, CDC, NIH to come forward because they'll lose their job. They don't have whistleblower protection. It's their life. It's their life, the way they make their living at stake. And we know that, especially looking at Peter Doshi's work at Johns Hopkins, there was an article about Peter Doshi and his whole consortium at that university, and he's a postdoc fellow, very brilliant guy, who's saying that why do we allow drug companies to, when they come forward to try to get a drug approved, to just present whatever they want out of their research, just the positive notes out of their research for their drug. They don't have to present the whole picture. So there could be numerous studies with many deaths and many problems, but they only have to do is present what they want. It's not obligatory to present everything, all their research. And Peter Doshi's trying to change that, which would help.
Thank you. Now you make it very clear that there is no science behind the claim that studies show no link between vaccines and autism. And I'd just like you to explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, anybody with a master's in statistics, in public health, in any medical science has to know that there's a definition of the term attributable rate. And what those studies and what the CDC said and the AAP that published that paper, the claim was, now we have another study showing no link between autism and vaccines, which means they're saying the attributable rate of autism to vaccines is 0. That's what they're saying, that the attributable rate, that's a term. It's got a definition. The definition has a mathematical equation. The mathematical equation for attributable rate is the rate of the disease or the impediment, but let's say the disease or syndrome, in the exposed group minus the rate of that disease, the same disease, in the unexposed group. And that's the numerator part of the equation. The denominator is something else, but in the numerator, it's the rate of the disease of the exposed minus the rate of the disease in the unexposed, right? Well, that means you have to have a study that looked at the rate of autism in the unexposed, meaning vaccine unexposed. You can make other claims. So that study, that last study that came out, can make a claim such as, increasing antigens does not increase likelihood. Increasing exposure to different antigens does not increase likelihood of autism. They can make that claim, because that's what they looked at. They cannot make the claim that vaccines are not related to autism. They didn't look at that. They can't, this is a definition that is set in, it's a standard. You can't wiggle, there's no wiggle room for the definition. And anyone who's got a master's or a PhD, who studies statistics, public health, will tell you that's true. There's no wiggle room. This is the definition. You have to meet the definition to make that claim. The problem is that people read it, the media picks up on the news, which is, another study that proves there's no link between autism and vaccines. They don't bother to look at what it is. And so people in research might read it and just believe, they don't bother to read the study. But if they read the study, they'd be like, well, they didn't really look at that. They didn't look at the unexposed, so they can't make a claim about attributable rate of autism to vaccines. You can't attribute 0 autism to vaccines because you didn't look at the rate of autism to the non-vaccinated. You just can't make that claim. It violates very basic rule of public health statistics.
Okay, thank you.